If a country paid thievery and silk to its enemy every single year, I would think it was getting poorer or richer. Most people would say poor, but history gave us a very different answer. That country was the Southern Song Dynasty. In 1141, the Treaty of Shaoxing was signed. The Southern Song gave in to the Jin Dynasty and agreed to pay a yearly tribute, 250,000 taels of silver, and 250,000 balls of silk. In history, this is seen as a deeply shameful deal. The emperor became a subject, paying tribute year after year, and had to accept that the Jin controlled parts of the land they had taken. Yue Fei lost his life during this turning point in history. The shame was real, and that treaty was real. But there's something else that very few people talk about. At the very same time, the Southern Song was paying tribute to the Jin. Both sides opened what was called Quechang, an official border trading market. There was an official market on the border, where traders from both sides could do business openly. Silk, tea, and porcelain from Southern Song went into Jin territory. Furs and northern herbs from the Jin come back into the Southern Song. So here's a question worth thinking about. A dynasty that bowed to its enemy and paid tribute every year. Why did it also have one of the most active and wealthy economies in the world at that time? So how did that tribute money actually work? The answer starts with looking at the number. Let's look at the numbers carefully. The tribute was a fixed cost. That's true. But the Southern Song was one of the most developed and active trading places in the world at that time. Compared to the size of the whole country's finances, the tribute was not too heavy a burden to carry. But the more important question is where the money went. After the Jin get the money, it faced a very real problem. They needed things that only the Southern Song had. The Jin upper class wanted silk, wanted tea, wanted porcelain, and fine goods from the south. No one of these could be made inside Jin land. As trade between the Song and the Jin kept going over the years, a lot of wealth followed back through the trading system and went back into the Southern Song market. Of course, not every to made it back into the government's hands, but the trading system as a whole brought a lot of wealth back into the Southern Song economy. The tribute money did not just float in one direction, as many people think. The most interesting part of all this is Quechang, the border trading market. At Quechang, enemies on the battlefield became business partners. The Southern Song had silk, tea, porcelain, and a well-built system for making and selling goods. The Jin had furs, horses, and natural resources of the northern grassland. Each side had what the other needed. They worked well together as trading partners, but there was not an equal deal. Over the long run, it worked out better for the Southern Song, which had a much stronger trading system. The Southern Song sold finished goods, things that were carefully made, could be made again and again, and sold for good prices. The Jin offered raw material which had value, but were much harder to keep growing in value through trade. Once trade grew big enough, it started to shape politics in turn. The Jin upper class had gotten used to Song, silk, and tea. The Southern Song traders relied on these northern trade routes. If it was cut off, both sides would suffer. This created a kind of quiet balance of power, not through armies, but by making the other side need you. Here is something that goes against common sense. Politics can make enemies, but shared interests create need, and need sometimes lasts longer than hate. Even when war broke out, the trading markets often opened up again once things settled down. Going to war was a political decision, but trade was driven by need. But there's one thing we need to be clear about. If you think the Southern Song was just being smart, buying everything it needed with money, that is way too simple. The Jin agreed to this deal because they too had military pressure and their own political reasons. The Southern Song agreed because it simply did not have the strength to push north and take back what it had lost. These were practical choices made by two sides facing a hard reality. Neither side was being especially clever. The death of Yue Fei was a very real cost to this chapter in history. That shame does not go away just because the numbers tell a more complex story. But this is where history gets complex. After the Treaty of Shaoxing, the Southern Song went through a fairly stable period. The economy kept growing, culture kept moving forward, trade kept expanding. In the moral story, it was a loser, but its economy did not fall apart. This part of Song and Jin history shows us something. The relationship between countries is never just black and white. Political conflict and economic ties can both exist at the same time. Hate can run very deep, but shared interests can run even deeper and last even longer. The tribute money the Southern Song sends out every single year did not simply disappear the way most people think. It moved through a much bigger trading network, coming back as a business income, tax money, and market trade back into the Southern Song economy. When people think about this time in history, what most people remember first is Yue Fei, Qin Hui, and the Treaty of Shaoxing. That image is what has stayed in people's memory. History is never just a moral story. It's more like a record book. In that record book, there is a war, and there is a trade, there is a shame, and there is a gain. And to truly understand history, you often need to look at all of it and add it all up.